Cheers.
Now, I don't usually take advice from people on the climate unless they've either walked or swam to the North Pole. So I won't listen to someone unless they've swum there. Have you done either of those?
Yes, I've actually done both of those.
Right. So you can talk
yeah.
about it. And you were saying to me that we're talking about sea ice. The last thing I heard, I was feeling really upbeat about the North Pole, that there were more polar bears nowadays than there were before.
Yeah, like all these things, it's complicated, but polar bears were very much on the decline because they were being overhunted. And I think it was in the 70s that a sort of circumpolar around the entire Arctic sort of circle area, everyone signed up to controlled hunting and very restricted. And since then, numbers have risen to about 50,000. No one actually knows how many, but it's 30 to 50,000. It's that generalised a figure, but that's deemed a healthy population. But they are challenged massively by the loss of habitat as the sea ice starts to melt away, and that's like a hunting platform for them.
Okay, so but if there were 24,000 and now there are 50,000, then they've obviously got something to eat, don't they?
Yeah, well, presumably, yeah. They're eating. Most polar bears, their diet is based on seals, and if a bear can kill a seal every 4, 5, 6, 7 days, they're in a happy state of mind. But they tend to come ashore in the summer when the sea ice retreats away from the coastlines, crudely. That platform no longer serves their purpose, so they come on shore. And one of the problems is that the sea ice is it's putting them on shore sooner because the ice is melting quicker, and it's not coming back in the autumns till later. So they're spending longer and longer on land, nibbling on grass and bits and bobs, mosquitoes. Yeah, so they're getting thinner and thinner in those summer times, and that means that they're not in as good a breeding condition for the mating season. So that's one problem, apart from just the sheer loss of a hunting platform. And although the numbers are good at the moment, really good, through protective measures, we are looking at a potential sort of collapse. It could take one bad year, and it's getting closer and closer when there is a large loss of that proportion or of that number of bears, simply because the sea ice massively retreats and is very slow coming back.
And this is a direct result of man-made climate change?
Yes.
It won't have anything to do at all with natural cycles?
There will be natural cycles, but the human input has dramatically increased the speed of change. And some of these bigger animals, what are known in the trade as sort of charismatic megafauna, the seals, walrus, beluga, narwhal, and the like, walrus even, that they can't respond, more likely than not, can't adapt quickly enough to accommodate these rapid environmental changes, their habitat change, basically.
So we've got things like COP27 where people make commitments towards net zero and all of these things, and then you've got China who turn around and their commitment is to, at some point, get on top of this. But bearing in mind the UK is 1% of global pollution, and China is a sort of large amount. Do you think that these sort of treaties are fit for purpose?
It's a process, is all I can really say, and what I believe. I mean, there is an international process, and that is the only way that we will get to where we need to get to. And it's not as fast as the majority would like, but it is what it is. And slowly, but perhaps in an accelerating way, as the problems escalate and accelerate, maybe pressures will come to bear on even the Chinese. And it's not just the Chinese, but particularly them.
So is there anything to be said in praise of a warming planet?
Well, I think in praise of might be putting it pretty strongly, but there will be individuals and businesses and specific environments, regions on the Earth that will benefit in the short to medium term, for sure. But if you look at the gross macro picture across the whole planet, it's not good. And I think Brits, 10 years ago, I was I found myself with the Secretary General of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen. And we did two talks, one to the London business community and another to the New York business community. And our double act, mine was to say, look, this is kicking off around the North Pole. It's the loss of sea ice is the biggest visual manifestation of global warming and climate change. And his job was to stand next to me, and he then said, NATO has the military resources to protect the Schengen area from incoming migration. But he said, the moment you ask us, NATO, or our governments ask NATO, to perform that role, we'll have lost. And he said that really because even then, the authorities, if you like, were recognising the sheer scale of movement of people en masse in response to climate change. And we were asking businesses to take as seriously as possible, really get active on how to help with carbon footprint management and so on. So the dear old Brits back then were thinking, well, we're all right on this green island, just get warmer T-shirt weather in the summers and the winters won't be so harsh, happy days, which is to miss the point. I mean, if you start looking at a slightly different timescale over like 50 to 100 years, they're all people who are migrating are going to want to come to wherever they feel they're going to be best served. And Britain and Northwest Europe is going to be one of those areas. So we aren't isolated from this problem.
What about the sort of politicization of the North Pole and Russia? So you've mentioned NATO there. Russia's definitely got eyes on the North Pole, doesn't it? There's some interesting stuff about nuclear missiles going over the top of the North Pole and being missed. So is someone looking to stamp their flag in it?
I mean, you couldn't make it up. I'm afraid GBNews cannot be held accountable for this because it happened before its existence. But quite a few years back, I guess 10 years or so back, a well-known Russian who is a friend of Putin booked to a bunch of seats on a nuclear icebreaker that grannies from around the world book to visit the North Pole. And it's like a 6-day voyage. They were on this thing, and on this particular venture, you could hire for $250,000 for half hour or something, a little yellow submarine submersible.
$250,000 for half an hour?
Yeah, cheap as chips. Well, if you're state funded, it probably is a bit, a bit more doable. But anyway, so other passengers were using this. Anyway, this little group, they basically took it down and put a little titanium flag, Russian flag, on the seabed at the North Pole. And then reported that they had done this, showed the visual, and said, and this is all part of our claim process for territories all the way up to the North Pole from our coast. And the media sort of, in my view, swallowed it hook, line and sinker. It could not have gone better for the Russians. And it seriously stirred up a lot of OMG reaction amongst Arctic nations and others as to Russia's intentions. I've been there 17 times, right? And various clients have put flags up, and even myself, I've had a little ensign at one point. I never thought to claim it for Queen Elizabeth II. It's a trash. But gosh, it got purchased globally.
So it was a gimmick. It was a clever.
Yeah,
it was a clever gimmick.
Yeah.
The Russians don't have designs on it, or they do.
Well, they do, but I would say, in large part, reasonably so. There is a process under international law where you can, basically, all the Arctic states, Russia, Canada, Denmark, America, and Norway, that surround the Arctic Ocean proper. They are given 200 nautical miles, about 260, whatever it is, offshore. If you go offshore of their northernmost shores and you draw a little line around that, that is all national territorial waters. They can do what they like in those waters. Beyond that, you're into international waters that crudely surround the North Pole. And there is a mechanism under international law where if you can prove that the surface shape of the seabed, the morphology and the geology, the nature of the rocks continues beyond your 200 miles, you can be given up to another 150 nautical miles. Oh. And that's what is in progress. So the Canadians are making claims, and the Danes through Greenland are making claims, and the Russians are. And the likelihood is they will get it because it probably can be justified under those criteria.
Is there a wealth of natural resources for us to dig out of the seabed at the North Pole?
No, I think it's fair to say, I mean, I've been advised by one of the major oil companies. They said, look, the geology would suggest that there's almost no useful hydrocarbons, oil or natural gas, within the international waters. There is potentially a great deal in the national territorial waters, but I'm not so focused on that. I can't influence what goes on there.
What's your view of what's going to happen with the planet in the next 80 to 100 years?
I was really hoping you weren't going to ask that.
Sorry.
So it's Christmas coming up. All things are possible. I personally have focused on one small piece that I feel is doable, that makes a statement, which is to create the world's largest wildlife reserve, which would be for the entire area of international waters around the pole. 50% roughly of the entire Earth's surface is international waters. And over the next decade or so, there's a new international agreement that should be in place, which will allow legally enforceable protected areas in international waters. And we would hope our North Pole Reserve will be like the flagship one that gets everyone thinking, right, we can do this. What do I think?
You think there's not going to be any sea ice left in 80 years, don't you?
Yeah.
Is that
by
gonna happen
2025, serious bodies who are into the forecasting of sea ice conditions are saying we will have likely no sea ice at any time of year.
And will
we'll
that
have gone
raise
from a
sea
white to a
levels?
blue top.
Will that raise sea levels?
Well, the ice in our drink here, if you marked off the level with the ice in initially and then it melts, the level is exactly the same because water expands and therefore less dense, therefore it floats.
Right.
So no, loss of sea ice in itself physically does not change the sea level.
Oh, I didn't know that. People keep talking about rising sea level.
Well, they should do. They should.
Why?
But, so here's the thing. Sea ice with snow cover on it reflects, pings straight back into the atmosphere, 90% of all the sun's energy that comes in.
Got you.
Convert that to a blue surface, and although you and I might see it as a sort of shiny, glittery surface that's quite reflective, it's not. It's hugely absorbing.
Yeah.
It absorbs about over 90%. So you've got this massive switch. And over a third of sea level rise globally is accounted for by the fact that as the upper layer of water warms from the sun's energy around the world, it expands. Water expands as a liquid as it gets warmer. So just that thermal expansion is part of sea level rise. But the big sea level rise is coming from glaciers to a relatively small extent, ice caps slightly bigger, and ice sheets, and most particularly Greenland.
Right.
If you took a hairdryer to the whole of the Greenland ice sheet and removed it, sea level will go up by 7 meters. Right. Well,
that would ruin Barack Obama's house in Martha's Vineyard that he bought, wouldn't it? That would be
almost certainly. I haven't been there, Laurence, but I'll take your word for it.
That'd be a problem, wouldn't it, for Barack?
Yeah, it'd be a problem for London and a lot of major cities. 1 metre sea level rise is highly problematic.
Yeah.
And we're looking between 40 centimetres, so half a metre nearly, and 1.5 metres nearly over the next 80 years.
Okay, so we've had the cheery Christmas message of Barack Obama's Martha's Vineyard property getting flooded. What's a positive? Come on.
I think that the pressures are building at faster and faster on all levels, business level, state level, international level, and I think it's really, frankly, down to the next generation who come in with a completely different mindset. We need to get rid of some of the old school who are fossilized in their views. And I'm not referring to us, obviously, Laurence, but
old school.
And I think some serious ructions probably need to take place.